In this video, I'm going to walk you through the steps for the first project, which is the zipper pouch. I wanted to make sure that you have a visual to refer to in case the printed directions don't make sense or are difficult to interpret. So the first step that the pattern tells you is to cut rectangles. Each rectangle will be 6 inches by 8 inches. And so you can see I have my 4 rectangles here, 2 of one color, 2 of another, because I'm going to make the lining of the pouch one color and the outside another color. You can do all one color if you'd like. You can mix and match. That's completely your choice. So when you are measuring before you cut your rectangles, one thing that has happened in the past several times, even though I know you're all familiar with measuring with rulers, for some reason when students use the tape measure, sometimes they have a tendency to think that they're supposed to put the number 1 at the start. So then, of course, if you measure 6 inches, you can see you're losing an inch. Same thing with the length. So make sure that the end of the tape measure is at the end of the fabric when you're marking and measuring for the size of your rectangle. Once you have 4 pieces, all 6 inches by 8 inches, we're going to start with the fabric that is going to be the outside. We're going to take just one piece of this, one rectangle, and we have our zipper, 7-inch zipper. I'm going to unzip this about halfway just to make my life a little easier with some of the upcoming steps. So when we talk about making patterns and projects, and I mentioned this when we were making your pincushion, everything has a right side and a wrong side. So the right side is the up side, or the side you want to face when you're finished. The wrong side is the back. So for the zipper, the right side of the zipper is the side with the pull, and then the back would be the wrong side. For our fabrics, the side with the pattern and the design and the bright colors is the right side, and this is the wrong side. Our lining fabric actually doesn't have an identifiable right side and wrong side, and that's okay too. So we're going to take our zipper, and we're putting the right side of the zipper touching the right side of the fabric, and we want the top edge of the zipper tape to line up with the top edge of the fabric. And I'm going to put a couple of pins in here just to hold it in place while I work. And when you place pins, you want them to go down through all the layers and back up again, so we don't just, stick them in like this or like this. This isn't a pincushion. We're trying to hold this in place. So, okay. Now when you do this, it will make more sense to combine the next step that I'm going to show you with this step, but I felt like it would be easier for you to see where the zipper needs to line up if I did this piece by piece. So we have the outside, the zipper, and now we have one piece of the lining fabric that we're going to lay on top of this. And if your fabric has a right side and a wrong side, you're going to want the right side of your lining fabric touching the zipper. Now I realize it's the back of the zipper, the wrong side of the zipper, but in this case, it's how we do it. So if I was doing the same lining fabric, I would be doing it like this. So we have right side touching right side and right side touching right side. So you've made a little 3-layer sandwich with one rectangle of your lining fabric, one rectangle of your bag fabric, and then in the middle is your zipper with the right side of the zipper facing the bag fabric and the top edge of everything all lined up like this. Okay? So the next step is to sew this, and this is our first time sewing a zipper. So the first thing you need to do is change your presser foot. And so the foot that is generally on your machine is this kind of all-purpose straight stitch foot. And on this foot you can see there's an opening, but it's in the middle. The zipper foot has the opening going all the way to the side, which is going to allow us to sew close to the zipper teeth when we need to. You should have a zipper foot in your attachment compartment that should look like this. Now if you see there's a metal bar here, there's a little black lever on the back of the bar that the presser foot attaches to. We call this the shank. And so when you push this bar, it releases the presser foot, drops it so that you can remove it. So that's how I got this out. And then the new foot, the zipper foot, you just line it up underneath so that the little groove in the front of the shank is lined up with that bar in the foot. And when you lower the presser foot and you line it up in the right place, it just snaps in. So putting a new presser foot on with these machines is pretty straightforward. If you have your own machine at home that you've been using for projects, the apparatus to remove a foot, put a new foot on, may be slightly different. If you don't have the manual or no one at your house knows how to change the foot, or if you're not sure if you have a zipper foot, you can email me. We'll see what we can figure out. So when you sew, you always want the pins on the top, because if we sew like this with the pins on the bottom, they can catch in the feed dogs or get pushed down into the hole in the needle plate, the throat plate. It could bend the needles, bend the pins, break your needle. Lots of things could happen. So the next thing we need to do is move our needle so that's as close to the side of the presser foot with the opening as possible. And so our stitch width dial moves our needle left to right. So we're going to move it all the way to the right, which is the 0 position. And when we put this under the presser foot, we want the zipper, which you can feel through here. We want the zipper to be on the side with the opening, okay? And you want your zipper teeth running right next to the edge of the presser foot. You're using your regular straight stitch and your standard stitch length. So you can start sewing and then reverse. So back stitch to lock it in. And then we're just gonna sew forward again, trying to ride along the edge of those teeth all the way to the other end. So when I came to this pin, you can see I started to catch, I started to snag. When I went past the first pin, I was able to sew right over it, which if your pins are perpendicular to your stitching line, your seam, you usually can sew right over them without a problem, but sometimes it will snag a little bit. Anytime you need to make an adjustment, anytime that things are not happening the way you expect, if you need to make adjustments, just keep your needle down in the fabric, and that way you can raise your presser foot, adjust whatever you need to adjust, and then sometimes just turning the hand wheel to get past a couple of extra stitches is all you need to do. So this is jammed. Just gonna pull the pin out and sew the rest of the way to the end, back stitch to lock it in. So now you have your zipper attached to one side of the front of the bag and the lining. And now we're going to hold it like this with the part we sewed at the bottom, and the top edge we're going to make another little sandwich just like we did before. We want the right side of the bag fabric touching the right side of the bag fabric that we already sewed, and the right side of the lining fabric touching the right side of the lining fabric on the other side. And just like before, we're lining up the top edges, so the zipper tape, the lining fabric, and the bag fabric all lined up together. So I'm going to pin this. So I've pinned this. I've got the same setup that I did before. Zipper tape, top edge lined up with top edge of outside fabric and lining fabric. Right side of bag fabric is touching right side of bag fabric. Right side of lining fabric is touching right side of lining fabric. And we're going to sew this exactly the same way that we did with the first side. Pins on top, zipper teeth next to the presser foot. As you go, you just want to make sure that your other fabrics aren't folded up at all inside here. You don't want to sew them into this by accident. So now, if you look at this, you've got the top of your zipper, the side with the teeth, the right side, and you've got the right side of your two bag fabrics. And then on the back, you have the same thing with your lining fabrics and the back of the zipper. So now we're going to top stitch next to the zipper. I'm going to zip it all the way shut. This will help me a little bit. And so what I'm doing is trying to move the fabric evenly away from the zipper. And then I'm going to sew with my lining fabric on the bottom, my bag fabric on the top, my zipper in the middle. The zipper's not covered. And I'm going to sew straight down along the inside of this seam on both sides. That's going to hold the fabric together and help prevent the fabric from getting caught in the zipper. So we always want the zipper on the side of the foot that has the opening. So we're going to put the edge of our foot right along this fold the whole time we're sewing. We need to back stitch at the beginning. And then ride this fold, holding the fabric flat as you go. Back stitch at the end. And then do the same thing on the other side. So this would be a good time to stop and trim some of these threads that are everywhere before they start to get into your project. But the next step is to put the two outside fabrics together and the two lining fabrics together. So you have this rectangle with the zipper in the middle and the fabrics to the sides. So when you pin this, you want the zipper to be folded toward the lining side like this. So I'm going to flatten the zipper, put the lining in place, and then I'm going to put a pin here to hold all those layers. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And you'll notice when I place pins, I always push the point toward the inside of what I'm working on. I'm less likely to stick myself as I go if I do that. Now I'm going to pin the rest of this so that it makes one rectangle. So when we sew this, we're going to start on the lining side, and just like when you made your pin cushion, we want to leave an opening in the middle of the lining side. So we're going to start here and we're going to sew all the way around this rectangle. We're going to pivot at the corners the same way you practiced when you were paper sewing, and we're going to switch back to our standard presser foot. So I'm starting at this pin, stitch forward, back stitch to lock it in. I just realized I never put my needle position back to center, so I want to do that. And I'm going to sew, and just like on your paper sewing, I'm slowing down before I get to the corner. I'm using my hand wheel to control my last few stitches to make sure that I can stop where I want to. When I get to the corner, I leave my needle down in the fabric, raise my foot, turn my fabric, lower my foot, and keep going. When I get here, I have all this bulk. I have the layers of zipper tape, I have all the layers of fabric, plus they're folded over to make even more layers. So when I get here, I'm not going to try to sew across this. I am going to do this using my hand wheel, pulling the fabric through. That way, if I hit the zipper teeth, if I hit a really thick point, if I hit the pin, I'm not going to break my needle. So I just hand wheel past that bulky spot and continue on. And we get here to the other side of the zipper. Same as before, use the hand wheel so that you don't break your needle. And then when we get back to this pin, we're going to stop and backstitch, which will leave our opening. Now this has been sewn all the way around. We have an opening on the lining side, so we can remove all of these pins. But before we turn it right side out, we need to sew the corners, and that's going to let our bag have a flat bottom. So I've removed all my pins, and it can be hard to see in the diagram what they're talking about when they're talking about how to flatten the bottoms, but this is what they're doing. You're squishing the corner so that the seam is now in the middle instead of on the top and side. It's running down the middle on the front and back. You're going to need to make sure this is very flat so that you don't sew part of the bag to itself. And just put a couple pins in there to hold it. So once the corners are flattened and you want the seam to be laying on top of the other side so that this will be nice and straight and flat, and you're going to sew about 1 inch from the point, so right about here, and we're going to do that on all 4 corners. Check the back, make sure it's not folded or puckered. If it is, you'll need to use your seam ripper to take out your mistakes and try again. So at this point I have trimmed all the threads and all the corners are sewn, and I have also cut off the extra fabric from the corners where I sewed them. So when you cut those extra fabric sections off, just make sure you cut on the outside of your stitches, not over here. If you cut here, you're going to cut the whole corner off and end up with a giant hole in the corner of your bag. And I'm sure this is going to make you seasick to try to watch, and I'm making the mistake of trying to do this without my camera stand. So we're going to use the hole we left in the lining to turn this right side out, just like you would turn your pant leg or sock. right side out from the laundry. And then because we left this partially unzipped, we can turn it the rest of the way. If you forgot to unzip it, you may have to mess around reaching inside and trying to open the zipper a little bit. So the corners here where the zipper is, we're going to push those out to the right side. And so you can see how the bottom is flat because of those squared off corners that we sewed. And so the bag sits upright like this. And then also the last step that you need to do, other than trimming any loose threads, is to deal with this opening here. And you're going to use your invisible hand stitch the same way you closed your pin cushion, and invisible stitch this hole in the lining, and then you're finished. So for grading these pouches, if you are a fully remote student, you'll need to send this into school to be graded because of the different criteria I evaluate them with. It would be really difficult to evaluate from just pictures or videos. So it would be really helpful if you could send it into school. And that is Project 1, the zipper pouch.